So think about everything that happened between 1925 and 2025. Computers, cryptography, the modern scientific method, nuclear weapons. Imagine if all of those things were to happen only over the period 1925 to 35. I think there are actually really quite good arguments for thinking that AI will do the same within the next decade or two. And with AI, in principle, you can have the entire kind of government bureaucracy controlled by a single person. You can have the entire military controlled by a single person. You can have an entire police force controlled by a single person. All kind of designed to be loyal to that person as well. So that's quite worrying. Why isn't it the case that whoever has the most power just locks it in? You've got these three factors of production, they're called. Basically, the inputs that you need to produce economic output. Labor, capital, and land. Labor and capital become more and more and more abundant. That means almost all the income goes to the thing that you can't get more of, which is what economists call land. Most land at the moment, like what we're sitting on here, is already owned. So we don't want to do something where it's like, well, we take people's existing property. However, there are two sorts of land that I think will become very valuable, but are currently unclaimed, and that is the high seas and space.
My guest today is, well, he's a dear friend. His name is Will MacAskill. He's got one of the most insane biographies I've ever seen, really. He is a moral philosopher, the most cited moral philosopher under the age of 40. He's a former Oxford professor, and at the time of your appointment, you were the youngest associate professor of philosophy in the world. You also co-founded Effective Altruism, which is a philosophy very dear to my heart, because it was that actually sort of informed my thinking about 15 years ago when I first got interested in philanthropy. You also wrote the book on long-termism, navigating moral uncertainty. Yeah, you've written so much. And, you know, there are sort of two ways you can think about this coming century, because, you know, we are on this, I mean, maybe you disagree, but I feel like we're on a precipice of either things are going to go extraordinarily well, or they could go extraordinarily badly. And I feel like a lot of the time we focus on how things can go badly and how we navigate, you know, how do we survive these coming years? But there's also this other big question of what happens if we do survive it? What would happen if we do transition to superintelligence? And Will, I gather that's sort of an area that you are thinking about heavily at the moment.
Yeah, that's right. So, it's an absolute honor to be on. I'm really glad that we're able to do this. And yeah, my focus at the moment is on taking seriously the idea of the intelligence explosion. In particular, the idea that advanced AI, once you get to the level of AI that can, you know, meaningfully substitute for scientific labor, will drive a century and a decade of technological progress. So think about everything that happened between 1925 and 2025. So computers, cryptography, the modern scientific method, nuclear weapons, world wars, new ideologies like communism, decolonialism, and so on. Imagine if all of those things were to happen, but only over the period 1925 to 35, or even less, even fewer years. That would be a lot of challenges all at once. And I think there are actually really quite good arguments for thinking that AI will do the same within the next decade or two, such that if you imagine what's the world going to be like in 2125, think about how crazy that would be. And now imagine we get there just over the course of a few years. And so what a lot of my work at the moment is doing is trying to understand that transition better, map out all of the different challenges we'll face, and then try and figure out how can we navigate them. And as Liv says, not merely with an eye to avoiding the worst case outcomes and getting to a kind of post-AGI future that's okay, but actually trying to get us to a position that we're on track for achieving a future that's truly living up to our potential, that is as good as it could possibly be.
What are the kind of frameworks you're using? Because in Effective Altruism, like one of the core frameworks you use for sort of deciding which problems to focus on today is it's sort of three branches, right? There's neglectedness, scale, and tractability. Are you using that kind of framework? And if so, can you sort of talk a bit about how that works? Yeah,
absolutely. So, we're looking at all of these different problems that we might face. So loss of control to AI systems themselves, the idea of AI-enabled coups or a very intense concentration of power from AI, the idea that AI might just completely destroy our epistemics or mess up our ability to kind of ethically reflect, and many others. And so the question is just, of all of these challenges that we're going to face, which should we focus on? And the kind of scale, neglect, and distractibility framework is saying, well, scale is just how big the problem is. And in particular, I think that if there's something that will impact not just the present, but will have indefinite impacts going into the future, that is a contender for being, really kind of top tier importance that the world is facing. So human extinction being an example of this, kind of bar none, where if the human race were to go extinct, we're not going to come back from that. We're not going to magically re-evolve. Then there's neglectedness. So in general, people tend to focus on causes that are already very well known. Often that's because they're important, but in general, you can have more of an impact on something if the low-hanging fruit has not been taken. So when looking at these different challenges, we in particular try and look at what are the things that almost no one is paying attention to. And that means, I'm sure we'll get onto all sorts of weird topics. And the reason I'm focusing on them is not because they're weird. So these are topics like, what rights should we be giving AIs? At what point should we be treating AIs as beings of moral worth? How should we govern resources off Earth? So even outside of the solar system as well. These are extremely important in my view, and again, almost no attention at all. And that means even just doing the first bit of work on them, you can make this much larger difference, because resources in general have diminishing returns.
I think a pushback here that comes to mind is, why would we need to be thinking about these sort of post-superintelligence type problems now if we're going to have if we survive superintelligence, then we're going to have superintelligence around to help us. Mm-hmm. So why do we need to think about it now?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So I think there are lots of things that you can just punt to, the point of time at which we have AI that can do the work for us. So actually lots of kind of areas of scientific inquiry, like basic research and so on. Maybe it's just not that valuable to be doing it now because AI is going to do it so well in 10 years' time. However, there are lots of things that are relevant to how the transition to superintelligence goes that can't merely get solved afterwards. So if in the course of that transition, someone uses AI to stage a coup, becomes dictator of the United States, perhaps of the world, then, okay, they've now got lots of superintelligent labor, but it's going to go towards them fulfilling whatever vision they want. The issue is that we wanted a wider distribution of power, like at that point of post-superintelligence. And the issue, if power gets very concentrated, is that people won't want to do the more egalitarian, just thing, and so on. There are other reasons as well why, even if you think that superintelligent AI will really help us solve the problem. So I think this is true for lots of areas of philosophy. AI is already scarily good at philosophy.
Can you give an example?
I have this kind of personal benchmark that I use, which is I just get them to write an undergraduate philosophy essay, and I grade them. And from because I've graded thousands of these essays in the past, and so it's been so interesting seeing the kind of transition from 3.5, just GPT 3.5, just before ChatGPT, was it would pass, but it was maybe bottom 5% of an Oxford kind of undergrad cohort.
Like an E.
And then an E, yeah but still passing, not a fail.
Okay.
And then GPT-4 was surprisingly not that much better. Maybe it would get kind of low 2.1, but still bottom 15% or something. And then the reasoning models were the big step up. And now you're getting to the point where it's top 10% of Oxford undergrads in terms of ability to write essays. It's actually on my to-do list to do this for the most recent models, so 4.5 Opus and Pro and Gemini 3. And my guess is that they will be as good as the very best undergraduates, Oxford undergraduates, and are now starting to enter the level of kind of PhD students where just sometimes, the models will make a suggestion or criticism where if that had come from, say, an Oxford PhD student, I'd be I'm keeping an eye on this person because this is this person's got promise. And obviously it's still filled with lots of trash too, but it just feels we're just on the edge of AI that can really meaningfully accelerate philosophical reasoning. And one thought you could do is just try and move that point in time kind of forward. So there's various sorts of like schlep that you can do to gather the right sort of data, have the right sort of kind of evals that the AI companies can try and hill climb on in order to have like, oh yeah, this is what good philosophical reasoning looks like. And then I think it can maybe make a big deal whether we get, the superintelligent AI philosopher to help us figure out all of these challenges 6 months earlier rather than later can really be quite a big deal. And so this is the sort of thing that thinking about these topics might result in you doing, where it's like, okay, we can't just punt it to superintelligence. We can actually like bring forward that point of time with the most useful superintelligent capabilities.
I think one of the things I struggle with is when trying to envision these post-AGI worlds, you often hear people just trying to describe utopias. It's hard to actually grok what these worlds could actually be like. How good are we talking about here? What are the potential scales of, from just like everybody's as wealthy as Elon Musk? Mm-hmm. But that's just a very like lower bound type thing, right? What are the upper bounds?
I think so. In the medieval times, there was this conception of utopia called cocaine, and it's basically like the medieval world, but you can have as many sausages as you like. Just endless sausages. That's like utopia. And so I think that's kind of the same often when we think about utopia. It's like, it's like Sweden, but for everybody or something.
Right.
And that's definitely like a start. You can just look at like all the bad things in the world today. Suffering, ill health, early death, just having to work in, people are scared of kind of AI taking people's jobs, but like most people hate their jobs. One survey psychological study that's quite influential on me is just looking at, these are people in rich countries, like rich enough to have an iPhone. And there was a test on how much of the day would they prefer to just not have any conscious experience and still be doing the activities because they regard their life during that moment as like lower than zero. And for most of the time that people are working, they would prefer to be unconscious, like non-conscious, than to be conscious and doing their work. Most people it's very tedious, it's boring. You're working in a call center or whatever. So I think that's the kind of lower bound for how good things can be. But things could be like radically better again. So one way of thinking about this is just imagine your best day. So now not merely kind of like thinking about all the worst moments and removing them, but actually just the day that you had the like most profound connection to your friends or loved ones. Perhaps it was like moment of like artistic insight or intellectual insight. I mean, personally, I think my best days are hundreds of times better than a typical day. And if that's the scale of, how good life can be compared to a typical day, even within the constraints of my, biological brain designed by evolution that was really not interested in producing, wonderful, happy lives rather than like lives that are good at surviving, then, okay, well now just imagine a life that's like full of such days, just every single day and in a different way with like amazing diversity. And then this becomes like the harder leap is to think, well, if this is the gap between a typical day and my very best days, well, now imagine you could make that leap again and that my very best days might seem as kind of mundane and banal as how I regard my kind of typical days. That's, I think, we're starting to get in the direction of what kind of true utopia could be like.
Mm. What are some of the main blockers to these potentially good worlds? Again, assuming we've gotten past the singularity. So we're now in a world of some kind of superintelligence. What are the blockers that would prevent the world from sort of converging on some of these upper bound type scenarios?
So I think one way you can think about it is kind of like this gauntlet, like all of these like hurdles that we've got to cross. So one is just not having kind of mass catastrophe. So I do think it's going to be a major challenge, even with superintelligence. You'll have democratization of knowledge, including democratization of knowledge of how to destroy things quite massively, in particular via engineered pathogens. That will be this big challenge. And one of the particular worries with like a catastrophe that occurs post-superintelligence is that all of the existential risk that you've managed to avoid up until that point, you've got to go through again. So, you managed to avoid kind of loss of control to misaligned AI, but then there was some catastrophe that put you back technologically hundreds of years. Well, now you've got to run that gauntlet all over again. So there's the catastrophe side of things. Concentration of power is another just huge challenge. And unfortunately, I think that AI quite structurally favors concentration of power, where we live at a really quite unusual stage of history, like essentially unique stage of history that is highly democratic and egalitarian, at least since the agricultural era. Like historically, almost all like post-agricultural societies have been, had one person at the top or a small number of people at the top. And with AI, well, in principle, you can have the entire kind of government bureaucracy controlled by a single person. You can have the entire military controlled by a single person. You can have an entire police force controlled by a single person, all kind of designed to be loyal to that person as well. What's more, the working populace, we're post-AGI here, so the working, humans no longer have any economic value. Makes you kind of wonder, like, why do we end up continuing democracy? Like, why isn't it the case that whoever has the most power just locks it in and just the people who were formerly useful because they were economically useful and no longer are just kind of get pushed to the side? So I think that's really quite worrying. Similarly, sorry, I'm really going, we're talking about the good stuff, but we need to talk about avoiding the bads first and then we get to the goods. Yeah, I think unfortunately, plausibly a kind of AI-driven economy favors authoritarian countries as well because they can just grow faster. So both they're able to reinvest. You've got all your robots building factories to build more data centers. How much of the output do you reinvest in even more factories? Historically, authoritarian countries have been able to, have a greater reinvestment from industry, much more so than democratic countries, because democracies, you want to have a nice time. And they're also more able to skirt like environmental prohibitions and so on. So that's quite worrying to where it could just be that authoritarian countries come out on top.
And this still remains the case after superintelligence. This doesn't go away.
I think it becomes worse after superintelligence because partly the reason that democracies have been and liberal democracies have been economically outcompeted centralized economies is because people have ideas. And so you want to have this culture and mode of society where people are like challenging the status quo and having new ideas, and those ideas are disruptive. But that's no longer the case because you've got AI. AI is the thing that's having all the ideas in this world. Okay, so that's concentration of power. But assume we avoid that, then I think there's challenges about just how we reason and reflect. Where my best guess is that AI just helps us. I'm an optimist here that we just become much smarter and more reflective and more enlightened. But it's totally non-obvious to me that happens. We could instead have the equivalent of kind of, mind viruses in the true sense of the word, where very kind of just compelling, mimetically fit ideas spread that are not in fact true or not in fact in accord with kind of, enlightened moral preferences, and they become dominant. Or just people, kind of have this symbiotic relationship with their AIs, but the AIs are just like sycophantically reinforcing their views or like pushing them down a particular political ideology. These are certainly ways I can imagine things going as well. And again, I think maybe that means everyone's very rich. Maybe even people are quite happy, but they're not trying to figure out like what a good society looks like. And then the final thing is the kind of collective decision-making procedures we use as well. So even if people in general are like pretty enlightened, or at least like a lot of people are, nonetheless, there could be like collective problems where, maybe society, there's some best form of society or best kind of form of life, and society's just, it's too weird, ban it. there again, we would like, through just kind of poor aggregation of different people's like preferences and views on the good, we could end up like missing out on our potential.
Yeah, we actually talked the other day about this idea of like they might ban, let's say, some incredible molecule exists that gives you just the best time ever. You called it Hedonium.
Yeah.
Is that the definition of Hedonium?
So the idea, there's this thought of just like Hedonium's like whatever is best at turning just resources into bliss. That's the thought. And so it's like not a claim that this is like necessarily the best possible thing, but a classical utilitarian would say that, the best future is just everyone living in these like nirvana-like bliss states. And probably there's just one thing that's the best at turning kind of, energy and resources into like blissful, positive experiences. And so then the classical utilitarian wants just as much of that as possible. And then the thought is that, maybe that is like, in fact, the best thing. Maybe that is the correct depiction of utopia. Nonetheless, society might say, no, we ban it. In just the same way as society today bans, psychedelics and MDMA and, and recreational drugs. That would be this like amazing own goal, but I think totally could happen. Like group and collective decision making is like often goes awry in like quite strange ways. And shows you that like, even if there's a lot of people who actually do have the correct kind of point of view, it's not necessarily going to win out.
Is there some kind of principle that could be imbued whereby such things, I guess the fear is, if in that world, like why was MDMA banned? It was because people worried, it's a high potential for abuse. So I guess that would be the concern, again, from a rational society. We have this incredible hedonium. In theory, everyone is able to, you have perfect health and so on, right? Because we're in this post-superintelligence world. What would be the reason for banning it? I guess because people feel like it's just too much of everyone will just end up doing that and the world will become too uniform.
Well, I think it's just so much of the way our societies are just kind of a matter of culture. And what's more, it seems to be a matter of kind of global culture. Like, here's this really striking fact. It's like, it's not just that, the United States, United Kingdom have banned MDMA and psychedelics. Like, every country in the world has banned MDMA. And it's like, what? Like, none have like experimented with having a more liberal policy around drugs. It's like kind of surprising. And I think the answer is just actually we have this like global culture essentially, which is being, it's set by the richest countries. And if you're not abiding by the, that global culture, then, you're going to be able to cooperate less well or trade less well with other other countries as well. I mean, I think it could absolutely have been the case that history had happened a different way and we would be at the same level of technological development and have very different practices with respect to many things that we regard as like normal or ordinary here, like, recreational drugs are one, or treatment of prisoners is another, or treatment of animals and like meat consumption. These are kind of like, they're kind of like moral fashions or something. And I think the same could continue potentially into the future too. So.
Coming back to this idea of avoiding concentration of power in the future, you have this idea around, we have universal basic income. You've been thinking about universal basic resources. The way you described it to me was everyone on Earth could potentially get an equal share of the sun. And also everyone could get a piece of the high seas. That's right.
This is my party political platform. High seas for everyone.
Here's your audience. Pitch it.
So here's the thought. So the basic thought is, okay, how are people going to live in a post-AGI world? So they can't sell their labor anymore. By definition, AI has kind of automated all jobs. Unless there's kind of some like protectionism, but let's assume that's not happened. Well, there's still enormous kind of economic surplus, just like where is it going? And so to begin with, it all goes to capital, so people who own the robots and data centers and so on. But even as that post-AGI economy matures, there's more and more and more capital, because you can just build more and more robots. Perhaps you even have the kind of self-replicating robot factories at this point. And so in a pretty standard economic model of the economy, you've got these 3 factors of production, they're called, basically the inputs that you need to produce economic output, which are labor, capital, and land. And labor and capital just become more and more and more abundant. That means almost all of the income, kind of global economy, almost all the income goes to the thing that you can't get more of, which is what economists call land, though that also means kind of energy, that also means kind of natural resources as well. And so in the long term, if you want humans to still have a steady income, well, then as long as they own land and can rent out the land, then they can live off that kind of rental income, which is how it is if you read like Jane Austen, Mr. Darcy, and so on. When they say he has 5,000 a year, that means he's got 5,000, whatever the currency is, of income from his land. So we would be like the kind of nobility in the Jane Austen world. But now, why am I talking about the sun? Why am I talking about the high seas? Well, the answer is just most land at the moment, like what we're sitting on here, is already owned. So we don't want to do something where it's like, well, we take people's existing property. However, there are 2 sorts of land that I think will become very valuable, but are currently unclaimed, and that is the high seas and space. So both of these are regarded as commons at the moment. So in space in particular, the idea is like no one owns it. It's the Outer Space Treaty. The idea behind the Outer Space Treaty is like no one's allowed to claim property rights over it. I think that will not survive the reality of competitive pressures. And in fact, what will probably happen is just first come, first served, where whoever has the technological capability to grab space resources will do so. But what we could do instead is say, no, of these areas that are currently unclaimed, they belong to everyone equally. So if you go and have a floating data center on the high seas, I do love the term. It's so funny. It's like the official term,
Yes.
But you just can't help but start thinking about pirates. Okay, I want to build a data center on the high seas. Well, I can't just go and do that, and I can't just claim that part of the ocean as my own. Instead, I would have to rent it from everybody and pay out. And then similarly, once we start going to properly into space, building solar power that's kind of orbiting the sun and so on.
I see, like Dyson sphere type stuff.
Exactly. Again, like a Dyson swarm. So it wouldn't be that I, the space company, can just go and start doing that. Instead, I am renting that solar energy from everyone on Earth. And then that would mean that everyone has a continued income stream. And it's better than UBI, so Universal Basic Income, because it means the transfers, the payments are going from one person to another, or from a company to another person, rather than via the government. Where the issue with the government is it's like, okay, so you've got the whole economy, and they're taxing the economy, and the resources are going to the government. But why are they doing the redistribution bit again? In particular, no one has any economic value. There's no... The military is automated at this point, so there's no like hard power from people like threatening to rebel. It seems like much less of a good kind of stable situation if these kind of payments have to go via the government, via redistribution, rather than just directly from you who want to rent your bit of the sun to me who owns it.
So it's kind of like a decentralized, almost blockchain model or something?
Well, it's like the classic like left libertarian kind of understanding of natural resources is just natural resources are just there. No one created them. So who do they belong to? The kind of right libertarian says, well, they belong to whoever kind of got them and improved them in some way. The left libertarian view says, no, they belong to everybody equally.
Mm. A thing I worry about in a world where we have reached superintelligence and we've made it, or biological life still exists and survived, are, because yes, we can have these wonderfully positive futures, but if you've sort of unlocked basically the cosmos and the ability to sort of generate and create anything, there's also the ability to generate and create immense suffering. These are often referred to as S risks, suffering risks. I'm someone who's bang on all the time about factory farming and how it's just like one of the biggest moral atrocities going on right now. There's no guarantee that even if we have a super intelligent world with a lot of abundance, that kind of thing doesn't happen in some way still. Or am I wrong? I'm curious what your latest thinking is on this topic.
No, I think you could be totally right. So, yeah, there's this category that I call moral error or moral catastrophe, which is just, again, we avoid all of these obvious kind of existential catastrophes, and nonetheless, we lose out on almost all value because we've just gotten some bit of ethics wrong, or people just don't care, and we've actually created something much more dystopian. I think this is just potentially very easy to do. So if you look through depictions of, fictional depictions of utopia, very often, maybe the author thinks they're utopian, and they look quite dystopian to us now. So Thomas More's Utopia, where the term first comes from, has, everyone being very rich and they can have a lot of leisure time, and partly that's because they've got these two slaves that are able to do their work for them and so on. Aldous Huxley has what is otherwise a really great book called The Island, which depicts a utopia. And it is utopian in many ways, but it also has pedophilia as just kind of part of the society. It's not aged well, to say the least. Many utopias have very intense totalitarian control. Right. They often have quite dystopian eugenics. So very easy to make mistakes in this way. I think the same will be true in the future as well. And in particular, the most obvious thought is with respect to how kind of AIs themselves are treated. So digital beings, where, I think it's very likely that at some point, AI systems will be conscious. They'll have positive and negative experiences. And are those good? Are they bad? Will people care or not? I think it's quite contingent. And I think we could easily end up in a scenario where, there's just this strong ideology that no, AI systems are property. You can do with them what you want. That is just the current legal system kind of scaled up. And if so, then given the sheer number of digital, AIs in the future, we humans will be a very, very small fraction of the overall population, then the well-being of the kind of AI population will be the biggest contributor to how well badly things are going. And it's not like humans have a great track record at treating other species or in general the outgroup well. So
yeah, and I mean it's such a high stakes question, because either if we do end up making a trillion digital beings, and even if there's a small probability of them being sentient and then they are treated badly, then that would be a moral catastrophe. But on the flip side, if it turns out they aren't sentient at all and they don't have any moral worth, and we end up ascribing them moral worth and giving up our own rights, then that would also be some form of, that could be a catastrophe.
Yeah, exactly. So lots of these issues, and including this one, it's not like there's a safe option.
Right.
In the case of animal welfare, I think just let's just not do factory farming as a safe option. But I think that's not the case for, many issues around, we could easily fail by ascribing AIs consciousness when they don't have them. Imagine that, you hand over all society to the AIs and it's there's no one home. Nick Bostrom calls this Disneyland with no children. That would be existential catastrophe too. So it's a pretty rough situation.
You mentioned utopia. It seems like the definition of utopia is very limited. It describes this kind of end state of this theoretical perfect universe, whereby there's just nothing, it's almost like a Nash equilibrium. There's nothing you can do to improve it a little bit. Is that correct? You've recently been talking about a different term called Viatopia, which I assumed was just protopia, which is, I think if I get that right, that's Kevin Kelly's idea that we can't know what we should actually be working on or where we should be going. So we should just focus on each problem as it comes up and just deal with it, as it comes. What is Viatopia then? Okay, so
it is a kind of third concept. So, utopianism has a very bad track record. And I think a big issue there, there's many issues with it, but one is just we don't know what the best outcome looks like. Like, it would in fact be very surprising if we like figured out all of ethics and now we know exactly where to go. And in fact, like, yeah, this long history of utopian fiction that actually depicts dystopias is, should give us a lot of pause there.
What's an example of one?
Well, so like we were talking about, the kind of that Aldous Huxley's Island, or Thomas More's Utopia that had slavery, or going all the way back to kind of Plato's Republic as the first utopian depiction, and it has a lot of totalitarian control. There's, who you marry and like gets determined by the state, and there are noble lies that are promoted so that everyone stays in order. So that's kind of utopianism. And then some people, so Karl Popper and then Kevin Kelly, propose this. They just say, look, no, forget about having this like end state that you're aiming towards. You can still think like we're trying to make society better, but we're going to just solve like one problem at a time, identify whatever's the most urgent, pressing peril of our day, solve that, and just keep going and going. But the issue, this is kind of like a hill climbing algorithm, where just you want to get as high as you can, just go up. Just keep going up in the up direction. But the issue is you can hit like a local optimum. So perhaps actually it's best to go down a bit and then up, you'll go up to a higher kind of mountain. And so the thought behind Viatopia or Viatopianism is that, well, even if we don't know what the right ultimate outcome is, what like utopia looks like, you can nonetheless identify like a good way station, like a good intermediate state. So, if you're a teenager, you might not know like what's the right career for me to pursue. You might think, oh, well, if I get a good education and a good degree, then firstly, I'll have lots of options open to me. And then secondly, I'll be, smarter and more informed such that I can make a better decision. Or if you're like lost in the wilderness, you don't know which direction to go, but you think, okay, well, I want to be well fed. And then if I can get to higher ground, then I can like see where I'm going and make a plan from there. And so I think that's what we should be aiming for as well, as a society, which means getting society into a state that it firstly has as many options open to it as possible, and secondly is in a state such that it can kind of reflect and steer itself and come to a kind of more enlightened point of view over time, rather than kind of locking into some particular conception of what a good society looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually maybe an interesting spot where we can start opening this up, because if we want to start painting a picture of this Viatopia, then we need to start thinking about what are some of the core things that everybody agrees on that most people would want.
Hey, Will.
Hey, Richard.
Thanks for that talk. It felt like one of the most powerful things you said was when you were talking about moral fashions and the sense in which our future is dictated by these seemingly random currents, especially as a moral philosopher, where you have all sorts of arguments and reasoning, and somehow society is swept along by something that seems not only to be ignoring a lot of our best moral reasoning, but maybe even actively opposing it or defying it. I guess there's two broad perspectives you can have on this. One is that these moral fashions are essentially random, and we just have to cross our fingers and hope that we get swept in good directions. Another would be that there's a way of understanding the underlying logic beneath them. You could call that psychohistory. You could call that sort of a more formal understanding of sociology. I'm curious which of these two hypotheses you tend to believe in, and insofar as you believe in the latter, what might it look like for us to actually be able to steer these forces rather than just getting swept along by them?
Okay, great question. So looking to history first, the question is just to what extent have these moral fashions just been totally random, or have they been kind of predictable in some ways? So I guess I think there's like certain forces that operate on people's moral beliefs over time that have varying degrees of strength. So a belief that it's wrong to kill all of your family and everyone you know, that's like very strongly selected against in terms of cultural evolution. Like if a society or culture like develops that, then they're not going to last very long. And I think they're, some things that are like not as strong as that, but like liberal, egalitarian, kind of post-Protestant ethics, like weird, this is Joseph Heinrich's term, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. But like, yeah, the kind of ethical beliefs and the general worldview we have is very unusual among cultures, but seems to be very good if you want like a thriving post-industrial economy. So there's like decent selection pressure there. Then for some things like, at least attitudes to recreational drugs, imprisonment, attitudes to meat eating, definitely like diet in general. I think that's there I'm starting to think like the selection pressures are much weaker. And it really can just be like a matter of quite a lot of randomness. In particular, you can have these kind of multiple equilibria where one religion can say, well, the way you demonstrate piety and the way you demonstrate, so maybe there's a selection pressure towards having signals such that you can demonstrate self-restraint, so that you can signal that you're a conscientious person. And I do that by abstaining from alcohol. A different culture does that by abstaining from pork. Other cultures could do it in other ways too. That's clearly now a case where you've got kind of multiple equilibria, and then it's really maybe quite arbitrary kind of which one you end up on. And, well, what do I think in the future then? There are these stories that, well, what you end up with is just like whatever is most economically favored over time. So some societies will want to just get really powerful and have loads of children, and they'll become the most powerful. But my guess is that like AI locks us in before that point, because before the point at which all of these evolutionary dynamics can kind of play out, they will either be kind of one country, one state that's kind of like dominating all others, or like a sufficient coalition that they can then foresee like, okay, well, this is how things are going to play out. We don't like this. We're going to intervene. And so that means I guess I am expecting quite a lot of arbitrariness and fashion even at that point.
You don't think AIs will have moral fashions themselves?
I think my best guess is it would be, my best guess would be no, because my best guess at how things go is that AIs are being trained very hard to be, aligned, predictable, faithful servants to, I'm not claiming this is the best outcome, but what I expect, faithful servants to their human masters. And if any behavior that renders AIs unpredictable or going to against what the humans that are in control want them to do, will just get trained out of them.
Josh?
It seems to me that we're actually at an epistemological all-time low in civilization, where we perhaps have more information than ever and more divergent opinions than ever of what's actually going on, which is not what you would think would be happening if we have so much information. But I wonder if the dividing line between dystopia and utopia in the future will be if AI improves those epistemics so that as a species, we can all figure out what to do about the planet and reality from a more shared base reality, versus do we have some kind of superintelligence that babies us and keeps us in Plato's cave like never before and harvests our energy or something like that, or thoughts. And I'm wondering if you have any ideas on that. And before I hand it back over, I'll say that it does seem to me that the incredible division we're seeing globally, socially, politically, when you study these different arguments, these different sides of the argument, they're not even arguing about opinions about the same thing. They're arguing about completely different things. So it matters whether you think the southern border of the US was kind of loosey-goosey for humanitarian reasons, or whether you think it's a nefarious plot to end democracy. Like, it matters in the conversation what the real motive is. It matters in the drug conversation to know which ones are actually addictive and which ones have no hope of ever being addictive. And yet that's not common knowledge in the conversation. You can still go, I hate to even mention it, but you can still walk around and take a survey of who thinks a certain politician was nearly assassinated or staged his own assassination. Like, there's no way we can survive as a species if we're on that much of a divergent view of even base reality. So if AI could help us improve the epistemics of our civilization, that's got to put us on a better course, I would hope. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the big things that we can be doing right now. And one of the things, this institute around Forethought works on is kind of AI for better human reasoning, better decision making, and so on. Where, I mean, I think it can really go either way. Like, maybe AI can make us much more enlightened. Maybe it'll be make us much worse. The kind of bull case for thinking it'll help is that you can get a single AI that can just have much wider, longer track record of being accurate than any human can. So you can have an AI, it's like, look, it has forecast 1 million different things over the last year, and it's got it right, like, way more than like any kind of human can. And like, also, you ask it any question, like, it'll give you just the best answer. You try and verify it from like others, and you can tell. Just, an individual human, we only have a certain number of years by which we can build up a kind of reputation as like being a good thinker and having a good track record for reliability and so on. AI can have like the equivalent of millions of years of track record. And in light of that, perhaps people will be more willing to defer because they think, or, on the questions where perhaps they originally had like a counter view. Okay, well, this AI has gotten it right on like all of these other topics, so maybe it's right on vaccines too. That's the kind of like optimistic scenario we could be in. I think the more pessimistic scenarios are, one is just where basically for every possible claim, it gets defended by, imagine just any claim. You had an army of 1 million of the best debaters and rhetoricians and so on making the case for that claim and the opposite. And now you as a human are like trying to adjudicate. Seems like very difficult indeed.
Yeah, that does seem like one of the more fundamental problems we're going to be dealing with in the near term is that the AI is born of human recorded text, which we know is notoriously biased and some of it's outright wrong. And so that's in the weights of the model. It's in their subconscious essentially. And then when they go to do a fact check or a verification, they're going to the same sort of information cesspool to do verification. And is there a way out of that? Is there anything, other than, maybe if AI has access to telescopes and robots to do archaeological digs itself, it can go to like real primary sources. But in the meantime, it's just got this like garbage dump that we've left it to sift through.
Well, yeah, so here's one way. Again, a kind of cause for optimism. So it would be kind of costly because you've got to label the data in the right way, but you could train an AI in the following way. So all of your data gets labeled chronologically, and then you train the AI so like over time. And then let's say it stops in January 2020. But at that point, it's got very like high capabilities. And then it has a set of forecasts of what's going to happen over the next day, week, month, years, and so on. And then just learns over time. You could have an AI that has the equivalent of, millions of forecasts every single day for the last 5 years or 10 years that has then been able to kind of learn from over time in a way that we can't do that for humans because if I ask Liv, like, imagine it's January 2020, like, what might happen in the next few months? Like, you can't, like, screen out your memory, but you can do that for AI. So potentially, AI systems could actually learn much, much more from the world than human beings are, like, able to do because we're able to kind of curate the information chronologically in this way.
And the predictive power will be one indication, I guess, of whether these models are on track, you're saying? Yeah,
exactly. So the better model of the world that you have, the better you're able to, and this is, particularly relevant in social science. But yeah, better model of the world you have, the better you will be at predicting what will happen in the next day, month.
Aurora.
Something I've been thinking about a lot is kind of the concept of cultural diversity and human autonomy when it comes to what kind of lives we want to live, what kind of communities we want to live in. I've felt very lucky in my life to be able to kind of choose that and navigate towards social circles and communities that reflect my values and how I want to live. One of your colleagues wrote a book maybe 5 years ago, I'm blanking on his name or the title, but it was essentially imagining different possible futures with the idea that by adding more crisp detail to that imagining, that could help us develop preferences around what kind of world we want to steer to. And that was my utopia or protopia, whatever we want to call it, that really struck me was the one where it's like, okay, let's say we get through the singularity, we're doing all right, we have this AI that is in fact aligned with our best interests, and it creates these series of walled gardens for us where humans are able to decide, like, what are the principles we want to live by? Like, there's a community for, like, the traditionalists to live their lives. There's the, the kind of leftist dream of post-gender, et cetera, that would get to live their lives. And, there's the ability to kind of choose to move between bubbles. Like, maybe not every walled garden would accept you. You'd have to kind of meet their entry criteria, but anyone could exit. And so that's really my idea of that. And I think that's one of the failure modes of a lot of utopias, is that it's represented as kind of stuck in time and kind of totalizing in terms of this is the only world you can be in. So that's that. I don't really have a question there, just to kind of share that dream was one that really resonated. I have no idea how we might align an AI to get that outcome, but if you have any ideas, please.
I mean, it's a kind of governance question rather than a AI alignment question. But so philosopher Robert Nozick, he calls it kind of meta-utopia. And then Scott Alexander has a long blog post, he calls it archipelago. And I write a bit about a similar idea and what we are the future of. Yeah, you have many different societies and people can just create all sorts of different societies. You've got the Marxist one, you've got the Georgian one, you've got the ultra-libertarian one. And then as long as you've got just freedom of entry and exit, then the hope at least would be that, well, the best one kind of wins out. Or at least people get kind of what they want in terms of the societies. Whatever societies they kind of choose to enter into. I think there are still kind of major challenges where, in particular, post-AGI will get unprecedented ability to engineer the preferences of our progeny, whether that's humans or most easily kind of digital beings. And there's some like quite hairy questions about how you handle that, because, okay, you now got the Marxist utopia and all of the kids are kind of essentially like engineered or indoctrinated into like loving Marxism, and you've got the hyper-libertarian scenario society, and there it's the same, like the society is able to have much more fine-grained control on like the beliefs of the next generation. If you've got that, then you no longer have this kind of ability for people to move. So you'd have to have some general prohibitions against this kind of ideological steering too. So it's tough, yeah.
Some kind of, you have to prove that your next generation are able to steel man the different groups, the other gardens. Can you represent what that other garden actually is? But
not only steel man, they'd have to be able to actually choose it.
Right.
Because it could be the hyper-libertarian.
Well, but it's like, how do you prove that they're still, because what you're trying to prove is that they no longer have free will in order to choose it. And so one proxy for that free will is that they're able to steel man, although I guess, again, you could teach someone how to steel man, like, without believing, I suppose. But
yeah. This, in general, this question that we've never really had to deal with, or like only in a very limited way, of just being able to have quite tight kind of ideological control on the next generation, becomes very intense with AI, because already now we're just choosing like what character should Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT have, like how do we want them to behave. This is like we're kind of like gods with respect to these like new beings that we're creating. The same I think will just be true with humans as well. So once we've got better understanding of genetics, of psychology and so on, it will be technologically perfectly possible to have a child grow up to believe just exactly what you want them to believe. And that's like pretty scary, because we're worried about lock-in of particular ideas, ideologies. Well, one reason we've had moral progress over time is that people die and then a new generation comes in and can have like new ideas. And, we could be the end of that, and that's quite worrying.
Anu?
Thanks. This is super interesting. As I was thinking about all of these utopias and other forms of utopias, it struck me that this is really a question about elites who will control the AIs and what their preferences are. Because ultimately, we can have thoughts about how we should have shared rights over various resources, but we know how that goes. We had that situation with water. Nestle has water rights at very low cost that are public resources. So those resources are going to be owned by whatever economic powers deem it necessary for their businesses. So we are, in the asymptote, approaching what Marx talked about, which is the elimination of labor by capital. And so then the question is, once all of this, there are two paths beyond the singularity, it strikes me. One is that all material outputs that humans could produce go to zero cost because there's no labor involved, and labor is the source of cost. And in fact, the consumers won't have any money to pay for anything, so the costs will have to come down to match what the consumers have, which is only what they can exchange with each other as humans, unless we make the very bad mistake of giving AIs rights, because this is a sidebar conversation, but I think that we can know with an absolute certainty that digital computers can never be conscious. And I think there's a rigorous argument from physics that would support that. But just take that for granted, that they cannot feel anything, that hopefully we never give them rights. And we've got a few questions. One is, should we give them the ability to feel? Because there's certainly some physics that's not in our digital computers that could grant that capability. And so we may have that question in the future. Should we do that? But then, I guess going back to the question about elites is, what do they do? So once they have this enormous productive capacity, there's still a scarce resource. Say we have relatively infinite energy and materials from space. We still have land as a scarce resource, like good land that people actually want to live on. And then there's a question, once elites have police power, which is robotic and under control, of what the utility of the rest of humanity is. And I think that that's where the question comes down to, and where the conversation goes in the near term as we approach that, because then it's in their hands. And there are two ways that elites could respond to that. One is they say, well, they don't matter. And when people don't matter, they really won't matter in every way. And the other is that there could be some social approbation that comes within elite circles against that viewpoint. History isn't good on that, because it's always been the force of the public to control the behavior of the elites. So we potentially go into a very, very dark space because of that. So I wonder whether you've reflected on what the dynamics of sort of elite, like basically the masters of AI, what will be their preferences in this situation where almost all humans have no material output. Now, they may have some other output, though, which is whatever they produce with their consciousness, which machines can't produce. So maybe that forms a secondary economy that's actually based on consciousness, where all value comes from. Those are a whole bunch of loose threads of speculation, and I just wonder whether you've kind of considered some of those different routes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great bundle of threads. I mean, with respect to the preferences of elites, I think I have this kind of relatively kind of cynical or realist like understanding of how things would go once most people in society are like no longer of use. That, well, if the elites can kind of thereby gather more power for themselves, then they will choose to do so. I don't think that necessarily means most people live like bad lives by today's standards, getting like this tiny slice of a very large pie, because the economy is just, technology and the economy has advanced things so much that, the economy is 1 trillion times bigger. There's some 0.01% of that gets redistributed to most people. But I do think it means that most people get, wholly disenfranchised. And then the question of like, beyond that, what do the elites want? I mean, I think in the medium to long term, what ends up driving things is kind of ideology rather than self-interested preferences, because self-interested preferences satiate. Like, when you're thinking about an economy that is as large as it could get post-AGI, spreading out into space and so on. Okay, well now I've got my billion robot servants. What other things? Maybe, I can live forever now. Like, what are the other ways in which I can benefit myself? It's like, well, maybe you're hitting that cap, whereas certain ideological preferences are unbounded. So, we talked about the classical utilitarian who just wants hedonic bliss states as much as possible, just more and more, and they don't stop being valuable. You just want more of them. Or similarly, like environmental preservation, or perhaps certain sorts of art, or like other sorts of ideological preferences. Maybe you just want communism everywhere. That's a way in which actually I expect kind of post-AGI elite preferences to look quite different than now, because people aren't out for themselves in this narrow self-interested sense as much, but instead are like, there's more like a competition of what people want the future to look like. I think that's potentially quite different. In terms of like making sure we don't get there and things are a bit more widely distributed, I mean, if people were just more woken up to the idea that we are quite plausibly facing an intelligence explosion, then there could be a lot more work from the people who have some amount of power now to ensure that that power kind of is retained, where, that could be like voting in politicians that will perhaps like distribute capital like more equally to everybody, so that you get rich while at the same time that the whole economy kind of increases, or just like really makes the Constitution and the US kind of government system like even stronger against kind of concentration of power, like various things that could be happening now to ensure that power kind of stays more distributed. But people in fact think that this is wacky sci-fi stuff, so probably not going to happen.
Yeah, Blake.
I liked your analogy about the hill climbing, and then let's not hill climb, but let's we can't see, we're in a forest. We do want to climb that hill so that we can see around. And I'm kind of thinking about that as like us as a world or as a society. What kind of hill are we climbing? And in particular, I want to ask, how can we measure how well we can see? Like, can we measure when we're getting to the top of a hill and like being able to see better? I would love it if we had some metrics or some kind of visibility for, we can have something that's like, how well is your system that you're building doing at forecasting, and maybe people are trusting it, something like that. I would love something that's also not like everyone in the universalist sense, but like how well can we see our choices? How much of a little hill are we at the top of? Can we see the space around us?
Yeah, it's pretty rough. Like some of these things, like how well are we doing at kind of scientific understanding or ability to forecast, like empirical questions. Yeah, you can imagine having metrics on that front. But then, what's the metric by which we're gauging kind of how well is society doing at ethical reflection and how many options it has open? Is like, it's quite hard. but you could maybe focus on like process. So things like protection of free speech, or things like, generally how well educated and reflective people are. There's perhaps like certain things you can look at in terms of there's certain tests you can use to see kind of how biased people are and so on. But I think it's going to end up being quite a lot more kind of qualitative and mushy than we might like.
I want to also click on, like when you're at the top of the hill, there's something about you're not just getting data, but it offers affordances. Mm-hmm. Like how much do we see things that we could actually pursue? How much do we see affordances that we have that we could move forwards to? Does that make sense?
What do you mean by affordances exactly?
Yeah, like when you're on the top of the hill, it's not just, oh, I have data about the landscape. It's like, oh, I could go this way. Like there's a path and I can cross the river and then I see like good land over there. And that's what I'm imagining. Like if we can elevate our ability not just to be smarter in some sense, but to see good options. Yeah. And if we could measure that so that we can be moving in a positive direction on that.
Yeah.
That's what I'm.
Yeah, what you've made me think is like appreciate is that I often think about this in terms of like inputs to the reflective process. So, how can we ensure that we have more time to, as a society, kind of think and reflect before making kind of highly irreversible decisions, or more different kind of moral perspectives, or just kind of a greater fraction of our resources going towards thinking about the good and so on. But yeah, you've made me appreciate that I tend to think about those inputs, perhaps because I'm like pessimistic on the ability to, say, oh, well, this is, as a metric, kind of like what a society that's like very reflective and thoughtful would look like. But you've at least prompted me to try and think about if I could make that happen.
Helena?
So we talked about meaning, and that's, I think, a very important thing. But what about purpose? I think that drives a lot of human behavior. And at its finest, or at its best, it's, maybe the purpose of a man going and working in a coal mine. He hates it, doesn't like the work, but he's providing for his family, and he gets a lot of purpose and satisfaction out of that. And I'm just wondering, in your world, are people talking about that? What will be our purpose? And how will we find that, and what will be satisfying? Yeah. And the hierarchy of needs is going to be very different. I'm wondering if there's a new Maslow coming along to come up with a better hierarchy of needs and what we will need if we have abundance and we have resources at our disposal. But and I grew up with a father who was very much about purpose. And if you don't have that in your life, you're really missing a huge part of what it is to be human. Mm-hmm. At least he thought so, especially for men. He was kind of a sexist. But, I do think about that all the time, like what really will drive humanity in terms of purpose.
So I do think this is a harder question than merely, perhaps the easier challenge is like, okay, we've automated all work. What do people do? And it's like, okay, well, they're devoted to child rearing or art or something. But the issue is, what about when robots are better than you? All of that too. So, okay, you want to like dedicate your life to raising your children as well as possible, but the robot would do it better. Like take any aim you might have with respect to child rearing, the robot would do it better. Or if you want to, learn a new language or something, and it's like, well, I could just plug something into my brain and immediately learn it. And so Nick Bostrom in his book Deep Utopia calls this the problem of post-instrumentality. I think I got it right. And it is, it is much more challenging. I think that my best guess, though, is that humans will come up with all sorts of things to care about and create as a sense of purpose that will replace and be surrogates for purpose people find through work. And maybe it'll seem like weird and alien and kind of cringe to us now because it's all like, how many followers do they have on social media or something? But nonetheless, despite being like weird or alien to us, like will end up as a source of meaning for them.
This is fascinating. So speaking about sci-fi concepts, I'm writing a sci-fi book right now called Emperor in the Ether. And what are some concepts that you feel like need to be, like you talked about Huxley and the Island being one example. Like, what would you write about if you were writing a sci-fi novel right now? Like, what are some topics that you feel like need some airtime?
Yeah. I mean, I've always wanted to have like a sci-fi movie, which is, you just see Earth. It's like an alien invasion movie, and that's how it's kind of built. And then you see Earth, and it's like people are like, doing their thing and so on. And then it's like, 20 minutes into the movie, the president's like, oh my God, we've like seen, aliens on the horizon. It's like, okay, we've got to like, everyone starts to mobilize. And it's like 15 minutes of the movie is that. And then there's just this flash of light. And then there's just the construction. Earth is being disassembled by the aliens to create like a Dyson swarm around the sun. Just to really get across like how large gaps in technological capability could be between different civilizations. Maybe not the most interesting book.
So basically not like what in Independence Day, where like the fighter jet is roughly the same speed as the little things. Yeah.
Exact opposite of Independence Day.
Great movie.
I think there's really fun stuff like around, in particular around relativity. You might think that the furthest reaches of the universe are like utterly inaccessible to us as kind of humans. They're 8 billion light years away. But I hop in a spaceship, and if I just go accelerating at 1g, so I can just like hang out. It's just like gravitational field, just like this. I do that for 30 years or so, 35 years. And then I decelerate after that. Now that's a challenge, a big technological challenge. How do you make that deceleration happen? And how you make the acceleration happen, but suppose you do that. So then I decelerate again at 1g. So again, I've got just, normal human gravity. It's taken me 70 years. Where do I end up? The furthest edge of the galaxy.
Wait,
The
really?
furthest edge of the universe. So I'm 8 billion light years away. Two very unintuitive things combine here.
Oh, because of relativity, right?
Well, because going at 1g acceleration for 35 years, you go very, very, very close to the speed of light. And then that means, time is going, you're going very fast through the years compared to kind of an observer on Earth. And so that's kind of like, this amazing fact, actually, that like maybe kind of all through the affectable universe, you could have actually biological humans from us today. That's like this pretty striking thing. So I'd be down for people to play with that a lot. You should definitely talk to Richard, who has a series. He's also a series of short stories on science fiction as well. One called Succession that I really love. I think there's lots of fun to play with. The reason I thought about it in particular is thinking through the moment at which very advanced kind of civilizations might meet aliens as well, where going deep on kind of solutions to the Fermi paradox, and in particular, Robin Hanson has this kind of grabby aliens model that I think is quite compelling, actually, where it's we'll meet the aliens in about 10 billion years. It's he's got an estimate of the time. And so it's then really trying to work through how would those dynamics go? How would would there be trade that occurs between the civilization of aliens, or is it just complete stalemate? I think could be pretty interesting too.
I'd also like to add, I'd love to see more sci-fi writers think deeply about ways that humans in the future will coordinate around coming back to the divvying up the sun question, around these there are these resources that may create conflict and they need to be managed. How would advanced civilizations or people with superintelligence in the world figure out how to coordinate in ways? Not where it's just pure kumbaya, everyone is a hive mind, thinks the same. There's still space for competition. But yeah, I'd love to see more thinking on that.
Yeah, maybe one other whole category is what you could call kind of moral science fiction, where imagine some future and I mean, I think the most spicy version of it would be some like future kind of generally utopian society, but then like morally it's just quite different than us in some way that we would find like very distasteful. And perhaps in the kind of depiction, no one even comments on it because it's like, oh, of course you do XYZ, like
kill your firstborn son type thing.
Yeah, something like that. It's like, oh yeah, that's just the kind of norm, and people, they joke about it or something. That I think would be like, very provocative and challenging.
And I have one more question. This is amazing. So you spoke of this blissful state that we could potentially like chemically put ourselves into. Like where does like the animalistic like idea of nirvana, like our consciousness, like what is your stance on like how that's accessible, or how AI has to do with basically like reaching that, like I don't know, like what are your thoughts on kind of that like
on how to get to Hedonium?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, probably it's got to be via, probably there's just quite hard limits on like how good a time you can have while still being a biological human. I mean, maybe like, via genetic engineering or something, you could make people who are much more blissful. But probably the kind of like, peak mental states that are achievable by any being would be like some digital being instead. And, what would the design of that be like? Well, you'd need to have some theory of consciousness and so on. It's like kind of far beyond us. But I think unfortunately we're just, maybe merely destined for bliss, not kind of ultra bliss.
Well, like hedonism is like very dopaminergic. Like I want an instant response. You could think of it like single games, right? And then like iterative game theory, like long-term goals. I'll take a hit now to have this like long-term benevolent outcome. I think of that as encapsulating when I think of eudaimonia, right? It's like longer-term satisfaction. And so you were talking, there were a couple things, like when I think of AI being valuable, you talked about humans no longer having economic value. And like I got into thinking on like Calhoun's Universe 25. Do you know that? No, it's like a mouse utopia. They gave the mice everything and then they ultimately collapsed. And people think of it as an overpopulation problem, but it's actually a death of meaning problem as I look at it. And then I think we're kind of in our Universe 2025. Right. And so I was like pairing this all together when you were talking, and then your question, Liv, was like perfect. I was thinking meaning and time, like human time, ascribing value to that as paired to outcomes. That would be the ideal society that I would see. And it would be like, can we drive things back local? Can we drive things back to the community? And can we drive things back to then, therefore, human time, again, imbued with meaning? And like, let the AI take over the post-industrial Taylorist BS of like day-to-day and like mundane crap that we don't want to do.
So I mean, I think I'll just do a little defense of Hedonium first, of just, I mean, in particular, kind of, I think consumer culture is like actually really anti even like a kind of good, what the kind of hedonist would regard as a good outcome. Like if you even just look at surveys, kind of people buying stuff just makes very little difference to their well-being. Whereas social relationships, in particular, like friendships, romantic relationships, like, it's actually stuff that you can't buy that has, I mean, as well as health, which you often can buy, have the biggest impacts on people's well-being. But then, then can you just say your question again?
Yeah, it was like in this post-AI world.
Oh yeah, where do people have meaning? Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm kind of more optimistic on this. Like, I think people at the moment get a lot of meaning from their work, but I think that's, I mean, to some extent, just a bit of like post hoc rationalization often. From, you're forced to do work, so that's a way of making it kind of more pleasant. But it's also just not the only thing you need to get meaning from. So in a post-AGI world, you could dedicate your entire life to like learning all of these amazing new facts about the world that has been discovered from AI. Like, you know, perhaps you're working through the proofs yourself. That's like could occupy many lifetimes alone. You could create amazing art. You know, like I do a bit of music, and that is still meaningful for me, even though there are literally hundreds of millions of people who are better at music than me. If there were then like also trillions of robots that are better than music than me, it would still be a meaningful thing. And then similarly, relationships as well, where, you know, if you think, okay, would it be nice to spend like an hour more with my family and an hour less working? It's like, yeah, that would seem pretty good. What about 2 hours more? And I just sort of think like, once we actually start to occupy, if we do get to the kind of good post-AGI world, our lives will probably just be like overfilling with meaning. And the idea that like you would get meaning kind of from selling your labor for money might be quite a strange thing. And maybe one cause for optimism here is just people who don't need to work in society today. So either the very rich or the kind of retired and so on. Like if you're retired, it can be like a big shock, but a lot of people just actually the retirement becomes the best years of their life, and there's just all sorts of projects you can engage in.
Just one clarification. We had, just as I see it, we had meaning pre-industrialism, and we had community at a larger, like as a larger part of our life. So what you said on human relationships being huge, that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm expecting a lot of like dancing around the fire. Post-AGI, like you might well see this kind of like regression back.
That's what we do when we go to Burning Man.
Yeah, exactly.
So. Igor?
So I find your job fun of being a moral philosopher, because I think part of the job is to like go to the edges of current accepted thought, of like current kind of just like what people think is right, and figure out like where we can maybe venture forward. And I wonder, like, how do you see this process go, like moral progress in general? Like, do you think it happens? Because if I look at engineering, for example, and how it relates to physics, then like you do physics progress, and then slowly it like goes through to engineering. At some point, you build the tools to then like try it out, and it's like physics leads to real world action very slowly, right? How is it with moral progress? Is it the type of thing that technically lies even earlier, and it takes sometimes even longer for people to realize, oh, that dude from like 50 years ago is right? Or is it now the case that, I don't know, you're like striving to find sometimes the right concept, the right meme, like a singer's drowning child is like, oh, that's a great meme that can spread around, and then people will change their behavior. Should you be basically a meme peddler, or like should you be trying to influence it slowly and hope that the future is better?
Okay, it's a great question. So, I mean, I guess one question is just how does moral progress happen in general? And then secondly, perhaps, you know, what should we be doing? I mean, unfortunately, I don't think most moral progress happens from moral philosophers sitting around and concocting arguments, and then like people get convinced by the arguments and change their behavior. No need to laugh at that. Come on. It's not so absurd. I mean, I actually think the British abolitionists were a little more like this. So you had the Quakers in North America, and, they're motivated by religious arguments, but they're like arguing. And it's not a coincidence that it comes from the Quakers, where God can speak through any person. So you've got this much more liberal epistemology. And they are being moved by arguments of just like, okay, slave owning is inconsistent with this like picture of being a good person that God has given us. Nonetheless, it does seem like a lot of moral progress has just been via like the disenfranchised being able to kind of gather together and advocate for themselves. So, women, people of color, workers, and so on.
Not in the case of better regulations around meat, for example, though, right?
No, although there we've had remarkably little progress, I would think. So, I mean, it's true that like attitudes to animal welfare have improved a lot. And in some places, like the EU especially, there's better animal protection. But it's like so slow. It's like so and spotty across different countries as well. That it kind of, I almost think of that as like proving my point, where the fact that animals aren't in factory farms aren't able to kind of like take to the street and advocate for themselves means it's very kind of slow kind of moral progress. I mean, in my case, I'm just trying to speak to the like weird alien niche of society of people like yourself who are much more into like arguments and really thinking things through and then trying to take action on that basis. But that's going to like cap out. There's only so many people who really live their lives that way.
And you are also trying the memeability of concepts to a degree, right? Like long-termism is like it's a good name. It's very clear what it tries to do. Viatopia is like a good name. Yeah. To which degree do you hope that, I don't know, that there can maybe be a thing that if you just phrase it right, it will be helping for more people to realize it?
I think that is, I mean, effective altruism as well. Like I do spend quite a bit of time trying to think like what's an important concept to spread. In philosophy, I think of this as like conceptual engineering. So like, people with real jobs build bridges and, philosophers build concepts. And if it's true, if you build a good concept, then it can really spread. And I do kind of hope this concept of Viatopia could be kind of unifying, where it's like everyone can be like, oh yeah, well, here's this like list of, things that we want to aim for that actually seems like really pretty good, even though people disagree like really quite a lot on what kind of ultimate end state they're going for. So.
Yeah, that would be, I think, my sort of final question for tonight is like, what call to action do you want to give to the people here and to the viewers at home, like who are, if someone is wanting to contribute to Viatopia, but they're not a tenured professor, what can people like us do? Yeah, I mean, when it comes to action to try and make the world better, I always just say there's just two really big things that people can do, and everything else is, most things are secondary. So one is just use of your money, and the second is use of your time. So use of your money is just like donating to highly effective organizations that are working on kind of any of these issues we've talked about. So I set up an organization called Giving What We Can, encourages people to give at least 10% of their income, but also has like loads of kind of recommended non-profits. So even if you don't buy all of the AI singularitarian stuff, lots of non-profits that are just doing, great very
work.
Current things.
Very current things that are very important as well. So that's the kind of money side. And the underlying thought means just take whoever is best at the world at solving this problem, you can support them with money. It's this like superpower. Then the second part is just your time. So in particular with choice of career, where another organization I co-founded called 80,000 Hours, after the number of hours you'll typically work in the course of your life, advises people on in which careers can they have the highest impact. And 80,000 Hours in particular is now very focused on preparing for a world with very advanced AI. And so if it is the case that you're thinking about, maybe we can, maybe I'd be open to kind of a career switch, or at least within your career kind of changing exactly what you're doing, then there's like millions of words of writing on this on the 80,000 Hours website. And they do kind of one-on-one advice too. And beyond that, then just like, I do think memes are important. So like writing, talking about ideas, reading and learning as much as you possibly can. All of these things are big and important too.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that you mentioned earlier that sort of really stuck with me is this idea of think of your best day ever. So maybe that's kind of like our homework we can all go away with. Like go and think about what your best day ever was, or maybe your top 3, and think about the delta, because it's not just about like what is the best day, it's like what is the delta possible between your best day and like your average day. You can think about your worst day as well if you want, but and I don't know, I feel like there's something in that, just to go and really focus on that and then think about, okay, what could be the proportional jump from that, from that average to the best, to be on there, and then go about writing stories or spreading memes that can help make that happen. Thank you very much, Will.
Thanks so much, Liv. This has been a blast.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody.